Thanks for coming to this VR keynote. We appreciate having you guys here. So basically the point of this keynote is to do a brief description of the current landscape of VR and to present a new project that we're working on at Spectiv at the end of this talk. So if you guys have any questions or anything, you can see the Q&A that we did a couple weeks ago on our YouTube channel. We'll also be doing Q&As in the future, so you can check those out. The idea to do this keynote was sparked by some recent developments in the VR space that have happened, both technically and developments with competition in the VR space, the entire industry in general. So like I said, we're kind of going to be talking about everything VR today. Since we started Spectiv, there's been many developments in VR from a technical aspect. I want to take a minute to outline some of those that have happened and the impact that they're going to have on us. As a note though, VR is still a relatively new technology, has a long ways to go, but we're starting to see the steps that are going to bring us to a mainstream VR landscape in the future. With that said, the first development I wanted to touch on is the release of the Oculus Go. When we started Spectiv, there were basically two headsets. There was the Oculus Rift and the HTC Vive. Since then, both of those companies have gone on to make more releases. There haven't really been any other companies step up with a new headset, but anyways, those two companies have released new things. And so the first one I'm going to talk about is the Oculus Go. The reason this one is so important is because the Oculus Go is the first full VR experience that is entirely encompassed within the headset itself. So that means the Oculus Go does not require any wires or a computer. So we've always believed that one of the biggest barriers for VR that we've talked about in Q&As and things in the past are the intensive requirements for using a VR headset. Most notably the cost and the requirement of having a powerful computer, which most people don't have. So with the Oculus Go, there's no longer a need for a computer at all. Also, the cost of the Oculus Go is only about $199, which means basically the Oculus Go is the best portable VR experience in the world right now. The only downfall to it is that it's mainly focused on viewing VR experiences and not necessarily on the gaming side, because the Oculus Go itself is not the most powerful headset. This is where the Oculus Santa Cruz comes in. So the Oculus Santa Cruz, it's still in development and testing, but it seems like it's not too far away from a release date coming out. The Oculus Santa Cruz is probably going to be the next major step forward for VR in general, because basically it's going to have all the features of the Oculus Go, no wires, everything encompassed within the headset, but it's going to have the power of the Oculus Rift. So we believe that the Santa Cruz is probably going to start out pretty expensive, which is still going to present a barrier. But as we've seen with the Vive and the Rift, the prices on these headsets will come down to account for what the market thinks is affordable. Overall, though, pretty excited for the stuff that Oculus is doing. It seems like they're making huge steps forward in like commercializing VR. But we also want to talk about HTC, which isn't necessarily creating things for the masses, but they're making some pretty cool technology in VR as well. So, as I mentioned, there's the HTC Vive. They just did a new release for a brand new headset called the Vive Pro. The Vive Pro basically is just an upgraded version of the Vive. It helped with increased like overall graphics, so it's graphically the best headset on the market. And they also increased just doing VR in general, like the comfort levels. But really there's not too much more to note on that. It's not a huge step forward in like VR technology. But HTC did release something over the past month, which we're pretty excited about. And that's the wireless adapter that they've released. So the HTC's wireless adapter can be put on the Vive or the Vive Pro, and it allows you to remove the wires on the headset, and then the adapter connects and is recognized by the trackers that you use when you enjoy VR. So this is a pretty big step in VR because it allows users with powerful computers and headsets to experience VR basically the way that it was meant to be experienced, which is a seamless, immersive experience. And like, being tethered to a computer is probably the least immersive part of VR. So introducing a technology like this is pretty significant in taking away that, I guess, downfall of current VR. The adapter is about $300 though, so it's roughly the same price as the headsets, but as it is a brand new release, and so with any technology as we move forward in the future, we believe it's probably going to start to become pretty affordable. Overall, though, both HTC and Oculus have been making some strides in VR pretty quickly as well. Right now, it seems Oculus is doing more to appeal to the overall masses, the consumers that aren't currently using VR, and HTC is building things to appeal to the VR enthusiasts, basically giving them the best experience that they can buy. Both of these are equally important. I mean, we really want to focus on growing the overall mainstream adoption of VR, but HTC is really working hard towards building experiences that it seems like will hold people in VR, which I think is very important as well. But I would say that we still believe what we've been saying from the start, where we think VR probably could become mainstream within like the next 3 to 5 years, especially with the speeds at which it seems like these companies are developing. So those are some of the biggest developments on the tech side of VR. Now I'm going to go into discussing the developments that we're seeing in the VR industry, including a couple of our major competitions. So the two companies I'm going to talk about are NextVR and Jaunt. NextVR, which a lot of you guys probably already know about, they're particularly focused on live event streaming, which is something we're pretty excited about. Also, I'd say like leaders who are forecasting for the VR industry believe that live VR streaming is going to be one of the largest sectors of VR early on, next to gaming. But basically, NextVR started a few years ago, significant amount of private investor funding, like tens of millions of dollars. And they've been able to acquire some pretty major partnerships in the sports industry. So they have a partnership with the NBA, they have a partnership with the WWE. And last year, if you guys did watch NBA games, NBA playoffs, anything like that, NextVR was all over the NBA. They had ads in their stadiums, logos everywhere. They had commercials. The announcers at games were doing promos about NextVR. Basically, they were everywhere that the NBA was. As I mentioned, they were even heavily focused and featured throughout the NBA playoffs and the NBA finals. The thing is, though, even with all of this, it still did not receive that many new users or attention from the masses in general. There weren't really people talking about NextVR, people who weren't already VR enthusiasts. And this is a pretty stark indicator that there's just simply not enough users right now with VR headsets for it to be worth it to make a mass marketing push. Doing an ad campaign like they're doing with the NBA, it has to cost them millions of dollars. And we don't think that it's worth it right now to drop millions of dollars into something that most people aren't going to be taking notice of. So with the tech developments mentioned before, though, it seems like we might be able to approach a time where it is worth making a marketing push, as we mentioned, maybe in those next 3 years or so. But right now, when nobody has a headset, it's really just not worth it. And it actually hits a problem, is that a lot of companies in this space are spending too much money right now, and it ends up hurting them as a company. And I'd say the best example of this is Jaunt. Jaunt is the largest company in VR, VR experiences and such. They recently, as of this past month though, they decided to leave VR altogether, and they said that they're going to be making a move to AR. This is a pretty big piece of news in the VR industry in general, because as I mentioned, Jaunt was the leader. And to give you a little reference, Jaunt actually started all the way back in 2013 with a focus in VR, and to date they've raised over $100 million. So the thing is, though, even with that amount of money, they're going to be moving out of VR and experiencing significant layoffs, and this just shows the honest truth that the world right now is not ready for mass market VR experiences. And if a company like Jaunt, who had $100 million in funding, can't penetrate VR right now, then as a VR company, we obviously need to step back and think about our role in VR and how we should address it, and the speed at which we should move forward, how we should go about using our funds, all of those things. And so I'd say over the past month, we've been having meetings trying to decide which way we want to go, and I think we're pretty ready to move forward, and we have kind of a redefined way of thinking, and we're also going to be introducing a new project that right now is just very early on, but we kind of have a teaser for you guys about it, and I'll be able to tell you everything about the idea. So as mentioned in the Q&A, our first step right now is to work very lean. We can't expend a bunch of funds trying to move forward if the market is not ready for us to move forward. It would simply be a waste, and we'd run out of money. We do have our new VR video site ready to launch with new branding. It's a very good site. We would say it's probably very close to being ready for the masses if we wanted to go that route, but right now we're waiting on the right time to launch it, keeping both VR and crypto in mind. That site though, as I mentioned, we're not really going to aim towards pushing for the masses initially, because we want to work to grow organically and create a following of users and creators who are already using VR without having to expend a lot of marketing dollars. This is going to allow us to start small and focus on growing the core community of the project and then building out what people want the most. Keeping in mind that consumer VR is still rather far away, this is where we're going to be introducing a new project which we call Glympse. That is Glympse. Glympse is an idea that we've actually had for a while now, and we're pretty excited to introduce it. We didn't think we were going to be moving towards working on it this early on, but with the developments that I've mentioned, we think this is actually probably the most strategic way to move forward and one of the easiest ways to move forward that could generate revenue. Glympse is basically an example of the type of VR that we believe the masses are ready for, and it's geared towards a corporate customer mainly, that's where VR is seeing some of its success right now. So I'm about to change over to the Glympse screen. Alright, so here's a very rudimentary mock-up of what Glympse is. Keep in mind that we've just decided to start working on this. We've had this idea for a while now, but we didn't think we were going to move forward with it this early on. But it's kind of clear that this is like the best route to go in the VR world right now. So yeah, as you can see, Glympse is basically a VR booth that would be purchased and installed in locations. Consumers would be able to access these booths, pay a few dollars to enjoy an isolated VR experience, and that is relevant to the location where the booth is installed. So what we have in mind for these booths is that they'd be hosted at like landmarks, museums, etc., all around the world, and then we would enjoy a revenue share every time a customer does a VR experience, or possibly revenue in addition to that for the production and installation of the booth. I'm going to take a minute to explain how the booth works. You can see it in the mock-ups that we have here. Basically, it's a booth kind of like an ATM machine, but significantly taller. And it'll have a touchscreen on it where users will be able to see the experiences that have been developed for that particular location. They'll be able to get descriptions of those experiences and decide if they want to do them. Then if they do, they can pay $2, $3, $5, not sure yet. And when they do that, a VR headset above them will unlock. They'll be able to put on that headset with headphones and enjoy a VR experience basically in 360 movement. So they won't be able to walk around and such, because that would probably put other people that are at that location in danger. But they'll be able to move within the isolation of that booth. So that's basically how the booth works. And I'm going to go into a further explanation of the vision for it. So basically, I want you to imagine like you're at the Roman Colosseum, for example. Colosseum, very cool sight to see. It's one of my favorite historical locations. I was lucky enough to go there a few years ago. The thing is, as amazing as it is, it's hard to imagine it in its full glory, because it's very different now than it was when it was in its prime. The actual Colosseum currently is decayed, it's broken. They're not doing gladiator fights there. There's nobody in the stands, nobody in the crowd, things like that. So basically it's kind of like a shell of what it was in ancient Rome. And so imagine being at that location. I enjoyed it thoroughly, but when I left, all I could imagine was wishing I could see what it used to be. So basically the idea is that by paying a few dollars, there'd be a VR booth at the Colosseum, kind of there's a walkway that goes around the whole thing. So there'd be a VR booth on that walkway facing the Colosseum floor. And you'd be able to pay a few dollars, enter the VR booth, and then all around you, you'd see the Colosseum be rebuilt like to its former glory. As you, in real life, are looking at the Colosseum floor with the headset on, you would actually see the Colosseum floor, and you'd see gladiators down there fighting, and you'd see Roman shows. And then as you do move in 360 and move around, you'd be able to see people in the Roman people in the stands cheering for their favorite gladiators, things like that. So the idea here is to bring you places that have historical significance, historical moments, things like that, and allow you to experience that location in its full glory through these VR booths. And you know, there's something to be said for enjoying a VR experience at your house in your chair, but it'd be an entirely different feeling to get to experience VR at the location where the experiences actually are meant to be. So Glympse VR booths are designed to bring the world alive and provide a glimpse into moments in history, right? So we're envisioning these Glimpse booths would be at like sports stadiums where fans could relive their favorite team's most historic moments. So if you're a Yankees fan or something, there would be a VR booth at Yankee Stadium where you could enjoy an experience watching Babe Ruth like actually point out into the stands and hit the home run and things, and maybe get to see it from like his perspective and the pitcher pitching at him, things like that. In museums where children could do a Glimpse VR booth and actually see the things in the museum come alive around them. So there might be one like in the dinosaur exhibit, and they'd be able to see the dinosaurs go from bones to actually coming alive to dinosaurs and walking around. And then in addition to that, as I mentioned, historical sites like the Colosseum, maybe the Empire State Building, where visitors could look around and see New York being constructed around them, or see King Kong climbing up the building and planes in the sky shooting at him, things like that. Really, there's so many things to do and so many experiences to bring people, and that's one of the reasons why we're so excited about Glympse. So in addition to Spectiv VR, we are going to be working on Glympse, and we think that this is a more clearly defined strategy moving forward for VR, not only looking at a mass market VR video-based experience, but also looking at a VR experience that has a real place right now in our current world. So with that said, though, don't forget, Spectiv is not solely built around doing VR, so we're also still working on our advertising platform, working to decentralize the advertising space by connecting advertisers and content creators and integrating this ad platform not only into VR, but into the entire world of advertising. So we hope that this talk has, given you guys some information on the VR landscape, and hopefully excited you guys, because we're planning to do more things like this in the future. We did the VR Q&A a couple weeks ago. We'll do more Q&As in the future, and really we're just going to be working hard to keep you guys more updated, more in the loop, and letting you know everything that we're working on. So thanks for coming out and watching, and we appreciate everyone. Bye.